Well, the race for the White House is, of course, extremely close. Today's national polling average from the New York Times puts Kamala Harris just 1 point over Donald Trump, with Harris at 49% and Trump at 48%. With 12 days until the election, both candidates are in a battleground state blitzed. My next guest follows polls and voter habits very closely. Ruth Galnick is a survey editor for the New York Times, and she joins me now from Washington, D.C. Ruth, it's good to meet you. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So for a race in which the sitting president dropped out mid-campaign and there have been one and possibly two assassination attempts, the numbers have been remarkably stable. I mean, how would you describe the state of this race at this point?
Yeah, I think incredibly stable is the only way to describe it. There have been so many monumental events in this campaign, and the numbers just look completely steady in a really incredible way.
So this top line number, and it's tough to look at just the 49 to 48 because it really does come down with the Electoral College and the battleground states. But what I have been led to believe as a Canadian watching your election is the Democrats need to be up by 3 or 4 points to win, or at least in popular vote, because they run up the score in California and there's vote inefficiency. What do we draw from the 49 to 48 number?
It's interesting. It's possible some of that popular vote advantage is slimming for Democrats as states like California go a little bit more Republican, but that's fairly in the weeds. In general, yes, Democrats need to be up by 1 or 2 points nationally, but that's not the only thing to look at. We also have averages for swing states, and nearly every swing state is within 1 percentage point or less, with the exception of Arizona, where it's within 2 percentage points. So even if you're not worried about the national number, if you're looking at those swing state averages, every race is insanely close.
Well, Arizona is basically a landslide at 2 points compared to the 1 point there. So, look, those would all be within the margin of error, these sorts of races, and I know you're doing aggregate averages in a lot of cases to give us a clearer sense or try to weed out some of the outliers. But we've seen in the past couple of elections sometimes polls underreported, Democratic strength in off-cycle elections, missed where Trump was maybe in 2016. How have you at the New York Times corrected for that in doing these averages? Because there's been some big outliers in the past.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and we spend a lot of time thinking about it. One kind of interesting thing about 2016 was 2016 national polls were almost exactly accurate. They predicted Hillary Clinton's national popular vote within 1 percentage point. It was swing state polls that were really wrong there. And for one, there were far fewer swing state polls. One thing we at the Times Siena poll do is focus on swing state polling. So we do a tremendous amount of polling in those crucial states. But also, one thing that we and others have corrected for is this idea that a lot of lower education voters are more interested in Trump, and we weren't correcting for that at the time, and now we are. So we have some new methodological innovation. We're trying to reach voters in a lot of different ways. There are a lot of ways that we're trying to improve on 2016 and 2020 to make sure these polls are accurate. However, polls are also, it's very challenging for anything to be accurate in this tight of an election cycle. When you're looking at things at a fraction of percent, polls aren't great at that. A margin of error tells us that a number could be 3 points higher or 3 points lower and still be accurate. And in this tight of an election, it's very challenging to be that precise with a big sort of blunt object like a poll. So I think even though polls have gotten a lot more accurate and we're able to see a much more realistic picture of what's going on, we still know that in this razor thin of an election, a small polling error could shift things in one direction or another.
Okay, so it seems like we're past the point in the U.S. election cycle where it's a persuasion battle. I mean, there may be some slivers of the electorate. I do see undecideds pop up from time to time, and I never quite understand why they are, especially when they explain what their values are. It seems pretty clear where they should be going. So in a race this tight, in a Canadian context, I'd say this is going to depend on who has the best machine and the most money and the best field work and the best get out the vote and the most motivated base. What's your sense of where that is in this right now? Do we have a clear picture of whether it is Harris or Trump?
I think in that case, it really is an even match, which is, just everything is an even match. They both have incredible turnout operations. They're on the ground. They have offices everywhere in these swing states. People have been bombarded with ads and messages to vote and all of these things. So I think they're sort of equally matched in their get out the vote effort. I think it's just going to be sort of a motivation and really is like base motivation. And for Democratic base voters, that's this idea of abortion and abortion under threat. And for Republican base voters, it's increasingly this idea that immigration is a big concern and that's what's getting them out to vote. So I think it's really those closing messages that the campaign send to their bases to try to energize them to vote.
So what about these competing images we're sort of seeing in the American news cycle right now? So we see Kamala Harris and her surrogates like Barack Obama with Eminem, Bruce Springsteen, Beyonce, and then there's the stories about Trump and Hitler, and his affection for Hitler and his former chief of staff calling him a fascist. I mean, are these things factors with the American electorate at this stage? What are your thoughts?
It can be challenging to understand, especially for many Americans and people who are not in America, this idea that Trump is a threat to democracy is not a big concern for most American voters. Voters are concerned about the economy. Voters are concerned about abortion access. They feel like they know Trump. They've seen him, and maybe he hasn't done things that are as bad as they expected the first time around. So this idea that he's a threat to democracy, yes, it's deeply concerning for many, many voters. Yeah. But for a big swath of voters who are making that decision, it's not a huge concern for them.
Well, the sequel is often a bit worse than the original sometimes in film. I don't know if it'll be that way with Trump, but it was fascinating. Some of the data I read and some of the analysis you've done at the Times, your reporting found that 70% of voters said they had been offended by Trump at some point, which is usually death for a political career. But when you read through the examples of some of the voters you spoke with, a black woman who said she planned to support Trump despite his past racist comments, a Hispanic woman who says what he's saying about Hispanic people coming across the border, there's some truth in it. And another woman in New York, of all states, who didn't like the Access Hollywood tape, which I cannot repeat on Canadian television, but she's going to vote for him even though she thinks some of his past behavior is completely sexist. How do they get there?
Yeah, this is an interesting piece of that analysis. So 70% of voters said that they've been offended by him. But for voters who have been offended in the past, but not recently, Trump is winning that group by 40 points. Trump is winning with people who have found him offensive in the past. Again, for a lot of these voters, and this can be sort of challenging to understand, Trump, who he is, what he's done, that's not a big factor in their vote. They're really focused on these kind of key issues that are driving their decision making. And it is primarily the economy. So you have a lot of voters who are saying, yes, I find him offensive. Yes, I don't like him. But I think that he will help me personally. I think that he will help the economy. And that's far and away the most important decision in their vote.
So, look, I know you're going to be looking at a lot of data for the rest of the campaign because the intense volume of polling in the United States elections is remarkable when you look at it compared to what we get here in Canada. But what are you going to be watching for specifically to see if something is breaking in the next 12 days? Because this binary, polarized sort of everyone's one ahead or one behind seems stuck. Is there something else you're going to look for?
Yeah, this is such a boring answer, but I'm not sure we'll see that much change in the next 12 days. I think we're going to be waiting for Election Day. This has been so tight, it can't get much tighter. We're looking at poll after poll that has it at even nationally and in swing states. And I think we're going to be seeing that right until the end. It's always possible that there are some late breaking things. There's this idea in American elections of an October surprise, something that changes the state of the race. We haven't seen it yet, but we might. But all indications point to this being a very stable race that we'll just have to, sort of see what comes out at the end.
But Ruth, let's face it, we've had a June surprise, a July surprise, an August surprise, a September surprise. There's been nothing but surprises in this campaign.
Nothing's changed.
Yeah, and nothing's changed. Well, Ruth Gallant, it was great to meet you. Thank you for walking through this. Hopefully we can have you back before Election Day, and it could be quick. Has anything changed, Ruth? Nope? Okay, thanks. We'll see you later. But Ruth Gallant, thanks for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.